What's up, guys? Golden Knight here. There's one thing most people do when they're learning any new skill. You practice. You repeat. You put in hours. And deep down you believe that the time invested will automatically turn into progress, but when progress doesn't show up, the first conclusion is always the same: I need to practice more. But what if the problem isn't the amount of practice? What if the problem is exactly what you're doing during it? What you're going to understand throughout this video is a shift in perspective about what practice really means, why the brain learns the way it learns, and where exactly the process breaks down for most people. If you've ever felt like you practice a lot but improve very little, this video is for you. The habit of hiding your own weaknesses during practice. There is a very common behavior among beginners that slows down progress without them realizing it: the tendency to always practice within what they can already do with some degree of confidence. The person avoids the point where they stumble, works around the difficulty, softens the challenge, adapts the practice so they don't come into direct contact with their own limitation. And this is understandable, because making mistakes frequently affects the ego, creates discomfort, and gives a feeling of incapacity. The problem is that when you practice to protect your self-esteem instead of exposing your flaws, progress stops. The problem is that no skill grows where you feel comfortable all the time. Skills grow precisely outside your comfort zone. That is where your brain needs to reorganize itself, pay more attention, find new solutions, and develop precision. When the beginner runs away from these points, they may even manage to maintain a pleasant feeling of performance, but that feeling is deceptive, because they are not expanding competence. They are only circling within a familiar zone, repeating what they already more or less master and avoiding contact with what really needs to be transformed. A lot of people do this without realizing it. It is not always a conscious decision. Sometimes, the person simply directs more time toward what comes out better, because that brings relief. Other times, they touch the difficulty superficially and soon return to safe ground, as if they had already trained that part enough. But the difficulty you visit quickly and abandon right afterward remains practically intact. And worse, it starts to occupy a strange place in your mind. You know it exists, you know it limits you, but you begin to develop the habit of living with it instead of truly confronting it. This undermines confidence, because deep down you realize that your performance depends on avoiding certain situations. When you change this posture, practice stops being something to confirm what you already know and becomes a laboratory for exploring what you still don't know. You begin to see your weak points as an exact guide to what you need to study. Practicing on autopilot. There is a mental state that the brain enters when you repeat anything many times. It is almost like an energy-saving mode. You have already done that so many times that you no longer need to think actively, the movement happens on its own, your fingers go to the right place without you having to decide. For everyday tasks, this state is extremely useful. You do not want to have to consciously think about every step while driving a car, for example. But when that same state appears during the practice of a skill that you are still trying to develop, it becomes the greatest enemy of your progress. The problem is that practicing on autopilot gives a very convincing feeling of productivity. You are moving, you are repeating, you are spending time. The body is present, but the mind left a long time ago. And real learning, the building of new neural connections, the consolidation of more efficient patterns, only happens when there is active attention directed toward what is being done. When the brain realizes that it does not need to work because it already knows that, it literally reduces processing. You are not practicing at that moment. You are executing something you already know in an average way, without any real stimulus to improve. Hours of practice on autopilot do not produce the same result as a fraction of that time with full attention and clear intention. The way out of this cycle begins with a simple question that most people never ask before starting a practice session: what exactly am I trying to improve right now? Not in a vague way, not, I want to get better at this, but in a specific and honest way. Which aspect, which detail, which transition, which part of the process is still not working as it should? When you can answer that before starting, the entire session changes in nature. Attention has a target. The brain has a real problem to solve. And that is exactly where learning truly begins to happen. The confusion between repetition and learning. There is a very old and very seductive idea that repetition is learning. That if you do something enough times, your brain will absorb it naturally. And there is even a part of that idea that is true, because repetition is a part of learning, but it is not learning itself. Repetition without the other elements of the process is just movement. It is just time passing. What the brain really needs in order to consolidate a skill is something researchers call desirable difficulty. This means that the most efficient learning happens when the task is difficult enough to require real effort, but not so difficult that it becomes impossible and frustrating. It is a narrow range, and most beginners spend most of their time outside that range. They either keep repeating things they already master reasonably well because that is comfortable and gives a feeling of competence, or they move too quickly to complex parts before having the necessary foundation. In both cases, progress slows down. In both cases, the person thinks the problem is lack of practice. What needs to be clear is the following: repetition creates familiarity, but not necessarily competence. You can become very familiar with something without becoming good at it. You can recognize it, you can execute it under ideal conditions, you can demonstrate it in a controlled environment. But the moment conditions change, when there is pressure, when the context is different, when you are tired or distracted, it disappears. Because it was never really learned. The confusion between getting it right once and truly mastering it. One of the most dangerous mistakes in the beginning is believing that being able to do something well once or twice means that it has already been learned. The beginner gets it right, feels relief, becomes excited, and quickly concludes that they have finally mastered that part. But mastery is not the same as occasional performance. Mastery is consistency. It is being able to repeat with understanding, stability, and control, including on less inspired days, in moments of pressure, and when execution truly requires presence. Without that, the isolated success becomes only an episode, not a consolidated skill. This mistake happens because success produces a very strong good feeling. It stirs hope, breaks a sequence of frustration, and creates the impression that the difficulty has been left behind. But in practice, many times that success was only a momentary alignment of factors. Tension was better, the rhythm clicked, confidence helped, the context was favorable. Basically luck. None of that is irrelevant, but it is also not proof of solid knowledge. The consequence of this is a very exhausting emotional cycle. One day, the beginner believes they know everything. The next day, they make mistakes again and feel that they have regressed absurdly. Then the doubt begins: how was I able to do it yesterday and today I can't do it anymore? This question appears because there was a lack of understanding that learning is not rising in a straight line. Between the first success and true mastery, there is a long phase of instability. You access the result before you are able to master it. This is a natural part of learning, it is not linear. The trap of increasing practice duration when progress stagnates. When progress stops, the most common response is almost universal. Practice more. Add more time, more sessions, more repetitions. The logic seems solid. If I am improving little, I am probably not putting in enough effort. And this conclusion is so intuitive, so aligned with the idea that results come from hard work, that almost no one questions it. But stagnation is almost never caused by lack of quantity. It is caused by a quality problem that more quantity simply amplifies. Adding hours to a practice that is already structured inefficiently does not solve the problem. It multiplies it. What happens physiologically when you practice for too long in a single session is relevant here. The brain has a limited capacity for concentrated motor and cognitive learning before the quality of attention begins to degrade. This limit varies from person to person and from skill to skill, but it exists. After a certain point in a session, you keep moving, you keep repeating, but the processing that converts practice into real learning is practically turned off. You are accumulating fatigue without accumulating progress. And worse, when you practice in a state of fatigue, the tendency is for bad patterns to become consolidated, because the tired brain resorts to the paths of least resistance, which are exactly the habits you were trying to replace. There is also a psychological issue in this trap that is worth mentioning. When you increase the duration of practice, you create an internal narrative of dedication that can be deeply comforting even when it is not producing results. You are sacrificing time, you are putting in effort in a way that looks like dedication. Doing more of the same is much easier than honestly examining what is wrong with what is already being done. And that is exactly why so many people spend so much time practicing with so little return. The attempt to improve everything at the same time. Another very common mistake in the beginning is entering practice with the feeling that everything needs to be corrected at once. The person notices that they have several problems, feels that many flaws are appearing at the same time, and tries to attack all of them in the same session, in the same exercise, in the same repetition. They want to adjust precision, speed, confidence, technique, consistency, posture, mental control, and final result all at once. And although this may seem like a sign of ambition, In practice, it almost always turns into disorganization. Because too much attention spread across too many things loses strength exactly where it most needed to act. What makes this mistake so treacherous is that it comes from a good intention. The beginner wants to improve quickly, wants to make the most of the time, wants to leave practice feeling that they worked on everything. But learning rarely responds well to this kind of anxiety. When you try to fix many things simultaneously, your mind cannot establish priority. At one moment you focus on one flaw, right after that you remember another, then you try to compensate for a third, and by the end of practice what remains is the feeling of having thought about many things without going deeply into almost anything. In addition, when everything becomes a priority, nothing is treated with the depth that truly transforms. The beginner sees their own performance as a confused block of defects, instead of seeing layers. And this weighs psychologically, because it creates the feeling that improving requires a complete and immediate reconstruction. The person leaves tired not only because of the training, but because of the mental burden of feeling that they are always falling short in everything. Little by little, practicing stops being a process of refinement and starts to feel like a struggle against a pile of insufficiencies. And when practice starts to carry that feeling, motivation becomes weaker. You need to learn how to choose one focus at a time. Instead of trying to solve your entire performance in a single attempt, start working on the point that unlocks the others the most. This kind of clarity calms the mind and strengthens practice, because each session starts to have direction. Dependence on motivation to practice consistently. A mistake that directly affects the quality of improvement is depending on your state of mind to practice well. In the beginning, many people can only truly dedicate themselves when they are excited, inspired. When motivation appears, practice flows, the person commits themselves, believes in themselves, and feels that now it is going to happen. But when that impulse disappears, everything weakens along with it. The problem is not enjoying feeling motivated. The problem is turning that feeling into a condition for improving. This is dangerous because motivation is unstable by nature. It rises and falls according to random variables that you do not control. If your practice depends on that, your improvement also begins to oscillate in the same way. On good days, you feel committed. On bad days, everything feels too heavy. Little by little, you start creating a bad relationship with the process, as if you were only capable of practicing when the desire is present. True maturity begins when you realize that not every day needs to feel promising in order to be useful. There are sessions in which you feel no spark at all, notice no major improvement, do not leave impressed with yourself, and even so, you still build something important. Because consistency is not showing up only when the mind cooperates. It is learning to continue even when the process feels like everything is going wrong. If this video helped you in any way, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next ones. Thanks so much for watching all the way through. Don't forget to take a look at the description. There are several important links there that can help you even more. See you in the next video.